What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Y'all should know I have switched to a new format. I'm trying to do, some daily short pre-recordeds earlier in the day and my live ones in the evening. So I'm trying to get it together here while I can do so. But I hope you're well. Hope everybody's good. Shout out to Malika. What's going on, man? Prince Johnny. Good to see you. Smooth Groove. Uh, yeah, Miss KP. Always good to see you in here. Freddie Wayne. What's up? James. What's going on? Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you will, so we can get it going. So today, I was sent an article from the Los Angeles Times. Now, I used to be an LA resident. I am not an LA resident at this point. I am obviously a Fresno resident. So I have not lived in LA for quite a bit of time. Nevertheless, I was asked to comment on this article. Now, I'm not going to go to any great depth as far as the candidates for LA mayor. I'm not keyed in to that, but we will cover an article that'll give us some insight into that. My concern is the framing of Black men in response to this LA political race that's going on and its inaccuracy. And what it illustrates in many ways is people's misunderstanding and difficulty grasping what's going on with Black men. And that's one of the reasons I'm commenting on this. Shout out to Brotherly Love. What's going on? Let's see here. Got a few people coming in. So anyway, let's get to it. So as you can see, this is a piece on the LA Times. And it's entitled, "These Black Men Say They'll Vote for Caruso, Not Bass. Is It the Ice Cube Effect?" by Erica D. Smith, right? And you got a picture here of Representative Karen Bass, candidate for mayor of LA, stands among supporters and volunteers at the opening of her campaign headquarters on La Brea Ave in April, right? It says, "In retrospect, I missed the first sign that LA mayoral candidate Rep. Karen Bass might have some trouble hanging on to support from Black men. It came in the middle of May when legendary Long Beach rapper Snoop Dogg decided to reach out to her main opponent, the billionaire developer and former Republican Rick Caruso, and offer up his endorsement. You got my support," he told Caruso over Zoom, TV news cameras documenting the exchange. "We're a part of whatever you're a part of as far as bringing love to the community." Now, in many ways, that just sounds much like what Ice Cube was saying last year, right? But we'll get into that. A few days later, there was another sign. I missed that one too. Clarence Avant, the revered music industry mogul who introduced then Senator Barack Obama to Southern California's political and entertainment circles, also endorsed Caruso. The 91-year-old, whose wife was murdered last year during an invasion of their Beverly Hills home, left it to the candidate to break the news. "I am humbled and grateful to have his support," Caruso told the Times. Weeks later, it's now clear that these two Black men have plenty of company. Right? Shout out to Artisan. Y'all make sure you support Artisan. Go to his channel right here on YouTube, Artisan MC, and support stand-up comics, right? So we can keep that going. Become a member. Go to Patreon. Become a monthly supporter of stand-up comics. So make sure y'all jump in and do that. This is the opportunity for Black men to actually have a comic book shop that represents their interests, meaning that if you have your own book, you can talk to Artisan about publishing it, or you can actually order books that you might not find at other comic book shops. Nevertheless, check out Artisan MC. So anyway, it continues. A new poll of likely voters conducted by the UC Berkeley Institute of Governmental Studies and sponsored by the LA Times found that roughly half of Black men plan to vote for Caruso in today's primary election. In fact, of all the men surveyed, Black men were most likely to support him. It's somewhat surprising, and as a Black woman, more than a little mystifying, given the years Bass spent working in the Black and Latino neighborhoods of South LA and serving as one of the two Black members of the city's congressional delegation. Of course, it's not written in stone somewhere that all Black people must vote for Black candidates. Plenty of Black men and women surely support Caruso for their own sound policy reasons, maybe even Snoop Dogg, certainly Clarence Avant. Now, that's a little dig at not only Snoop, but I suggest Black male rappers as if they're incapable of thinking. And this is a kind of slanderous kind of, approach that you can often find from, Black feminists who, don't like the decisions that various Black men are making. And we get slapped on the hand like that with these little under the table digs and even articles like this in many respects, right? That suggests that if Black men don't comply, not only with the Democratic Party, but more specifically with Black women's desires to uphold that connection with the Democrat Party, that there's something wrong with Black men. And a lot of this, of course, reached the news a little while back when an unprecedented percentage of Black men voted for Trump. And that isn't to say that that was any large majority. The majority of Black men who voted still voted Democrat. But because there was an uptick in the votes for Trump, there was all kinds of indictments toward Black men and their voting choices in response to what many interpreted as a dismissal by the Democrat Party. And we'll see more of that in the article. So I'll continue before I jump off into this. We are not a monolith after all. I mean, just look at Larry Elder. She writes, but in this liberal city, in this very liberal state, it's also true that Caruso is the most conservative candidate running for mayor, and that many of his proposals, though responding to genuine problems and public anger, run counter to what most Black Angelenos have long said they wanted. Caruso, for example, favors a return to some disastrous tough-on-crime strategies of the past, locking up more people and moving away from criminal justice reform. He wants to add 1,500 officers to the LAPD and has been endorsed by former LAPD Chief William J. Bratton, he of broken windows policy infamy. On homelessness, Caruso wants to quickly clear a lot more encampments, which Black men disproportionately occupy thanks to decades of systemic housing discrimination. Now, this is interesting. I've seen very little written on Black men and homelessness. And y'all know, if you've been watching the Onyx Report, I've been talking about this, for years, most particularly before the pandemic kicked in, because all the attention went to, women. It went to this whole notion of the she economy, and everybody was worried about women being, Black women in particular, being ousted from their living domiciles to a greater extent than anybody else. But nobody paid attention to the fact that Black men comprised the majority of the Black homeless before the pandemic hit. So what the hell do you think happened afterwards? Part of the reason Black men weren't part of the discussion as to who gets kicked out of their housing more is because Black men have difficulty even getting housing, especially if they had a prison record. So the reason that they comprise a good portion of the homeless, not only in LA, but across the country, is because of factors like that, along with just good old racism. But as we understand it, listening to Dr. Tommy Curry, racism is expressed as misandric aggression. So in that respect, what Black men experience, a la Jim Sedanius, is on the receiving end, the brunt end of the majority of racism. And yet we rarely talk about Black men now, unless we're talking about gang violence, incarceration. Maybe there's some lip service paid to that. But even in this article, there's only surface level lip service being paid to Black male homelessness. And yet it's a significant issue. She only brings it up as a dig to Black men, suggesting that they're too stupid to vote in their interests. But she doesn't really go in depth as to how long this has been happening, to what extent it's been happening, and how Black men suffer, and how Black men suffering may have something to do with this counterintuitive voting strategy. But let's continue. He has made big promises to build more shelters and housing, both of which are easier said than done. But if encampments are clear, when there aren't enough beds available, he has the legally dubious suggestion of moving some homeless people into tent camps modeled after one built to house undocumented migrant children in Texas. Compare that with Bass, whose proposals on public safety and homelessness are less extreme, but are far more realistic, sophisticated, and considerate of poor people of color. Indeed, this is why many political observers assumed she would have the backing of most Black voters in LA if she ran for mayor. Instead, despite strong and consistent support from Black women, the poll found erosion among Black voters overall, led by men. Now, this goes back to Trump. I mean, we can argue it goes back earlier, but we'll just stay to the contemporary moment. It goes to Trump, and then of course it even goes to the whole issue around the vice president. And it's not the vice president, Kamala Harris herself. It's the elimination of Black men from consideration. It's the elimination of Black men from the discussion. Black men have not even been named. They've not even been identified as a target. To the extent that they have been, when presidential candidates have raised the issue of talking to Black men themselves, Many Black men, in my opinion, did not know how to advocate for policies specific to their demographic. What they did was advocate for policies that benefited Black folk as a whole, but they didn't really push for policies that specifically targeted their own interests as Black and male. And that's one of the reasons we started the Black male political agenda, so we could actually create policy ideas that were rooted in improving the quality of life for Black men in particular. Why? Because everybody else has started to do so and have been doing so in some instances, especially in regard to Black women, for quite a while. And that leaves us in a position where we generically advocate for whomever, as far as Blackness is concerned, and find ourselves slipping into worse and worse positions. 271 watching. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. You guys see, or you should see, on the main screen how to go ahead and do that. You can do that through Venmo. You can do that through PayPal. You can do that through Cash App. You can do that through YouTube. And of course, you can become a monthly supporter on Patreon. And you can also support the Institute for Black Male Studies as well by being a monthly supporter of both the Onyx Report and the Institute. So consider doing so and support the channel. So anyway, let's continue here. The question is why? Is it just sexism or perhaps a related desire to uphold the patriarchy, given that Bass would be the first woman to be mayor of LA? See, that's that bullshit. See, this is this disingenuous argument that's taking place. And this is part of what frustrates Black men. First, you ignore them. Second, when you don't see them present, the first assumption you have is they're either sexist, or somehow, in some way, both racially sexist, right? So they're particularly sexist against women in general, or they're just sexist against Black women, excuse me. And at no point do you actually really get to the core of what they're talking about. Now, I will say this article attempts to, on some level, where they at least go down and talk to a few Black men. But at the end of the day, for her to even frame it in the context of sexism is already problematic, and it's already a smack to the face. As if Black men can't actually have a legitimate concern unless it's endorsed, ordained, and supported by Black women. Else it's sexist. Else it's ignorant, right? Because the other low-key suggestion she makes even earlier in the article with Snoop Dogg, much like Black rappers, that she's kind of referring to, that Black men really aren't bright enough to have a reason for not supporting what they've been told to support their entire lives, right? So that's part of the issue there. But it's already kind of ramping up. You can kind of see it early on. Just the introduction of sexism as a reason rather than actually entertaining Black males' reservations about politics and what's going on. So she continues, it can't be racism. No, I believe the answer has to do with what I'm calling the ice cube effect. If you'll recall, shortly before 2020 presidential election, the Los Angeles rapper helped draft a progressive plan for Black America. He tried to get the Biden-Harris campaign to adopt it and was told to wait. And so, driven by good intentions and hubris, really? He talked with Trump administration officials about the plan instead, drawing an avalanche of criticism, especially from Black women, appalled that he would even consider working with them. Ice Cube explained that although he hadn't paid attention to politics in a long time, he acted because Democrats weren't doing anything to help Black men and therefore didn't deserve any loyalty for votes if Republicans were willing to do better. Now, this is slick. This is slick on her behalf. Notice what she says right now. She says Ice Cube, right, argued that the Democrats weren't doing anything to help Black men. Much of what Cube talked about, especially when he got into the discussion with the Cocktails with Queens, wasn't about Black men. I'm a masculinist. If Ice Cube wants to talk about Black men and policies tied to that, I would have loved to have heard that discussion, but that's not what I heard. What I heard Cube talking about were policies that support Black people, the Black community. And this was the crux of his argument with Cocktails with Queens. He wasn't talking specifically about Black men, he was talking about Black America. And he was making the point that we're so tied to one voting method that we're not looking at alternatives, or if nothing else, demonstrating to the Democrat Party that our votes are not a guarantee. Now, for years, we've seen at varying elections, Black folk withdraw from voting altogether. But the emphasis tends to remain on those who do. And overwhelmingly, we vote Democrat. I myself have always been on the left. I tend to vote green, but my reason for voting green wasn't necessarily an adherence to the Green Party per se. It was an argument toward third party options. I was always pushing for an alternative because I got dissatisfied with the same old Democrat Republican debate, neither of which seemed to really put any serious equity in the Black vote. Just around presidential time, there was some lip service paid to that, but then it would dissipate. Well, what we've seen in the last election is it really did dissipate again, but there were some nods to Black women in terms of hiring them in certain positions, so on and so forth. No mention of Black men, as if Black men don't have any issues, right? And we're going to see more of that in this article, so I don't want to belay that. But still, at the end of the day, many Black men and Black folk in general have withdrawn from voting. And that's not necessarily regarded. You don't hear as much conversation about how to get them to vote as much as you hear about who they vote for the percentage that vote. So when Black men don't vote, nobody cares. When Black men do vote, there's criticism when they don't vote the party line, but not enough conversation about why Black men are choosing to shake the tree, as it were. So we continue. Every side is the dark side for us here in America. He put it at the time. They're all the same until something changes for us. They all lie and they all cheat. I heard a similar sort of logic when I went to Leimert Park over the weekend to try to understand the apparent lagging support for Bass. I was hoping to talk to Black men who plan to cast their ballots for Caruso. Instead, I found a bunch of irritated Bass voters who nevertheless understood why their fellow Black men would do such a thing. They told me many Black men are disillusioned and fed up with the status quo. They don't believe another politician can fix anything in Los Angeles, so why not give Caruso a shot? Some Black men, they said, are naive about the complexities of city politics and don't understand that Caruso's promises on homelessness and the economy won't be easy or quick to implement if they happen at all. Other Black men, they said, see ads on TV and Instagram, part of Caruso's multi-million-dollar massive advertising blitz, and don't know about his history on the LA Board of Police Commissioners or that he wants to add cops to the LAPD. Black men can be sexist too, they admitted. Some see Bass as sweet or soft, not hard enough to be mayor, like a shrewd, wealthy developer steeped in deal making. As one Black political insider put it, why are we going to vote for her? Because she's a nice lady? And then first of all, let me say, I don't know how much scrutiny there was really paid to Harris as far as that whole discussion goes. Much of it was predicated on her being a Black woman, right? So there's some issues I have with that. We didn't have a critical discussion about what the fuck she actually brought to the Black community, especially with her track record in the Bay Area with Black men. But nobody cared about that at the time, as long as we could get a Black face in a high place. And then there were the many other Black men I met who were completely disengaged from politics. See, that's what I was saying earlier, to the point of not knowing there's an election happening, much less who's on the ballot. Some were like Willie, who told me he used to vote regularly but stopped because he doesn't believe any politician can solve his problems. You can work and your wife can or your child can work. The dogs can work. The rats and roaches even work, and you still can't afford to stay in a studio apartment in South LA. He told me, taking a break from selling used DVDs and books out of his minivan. He continued, his voice rising. And when was the last time you heard a politician say Black man? When they think of the Black community, they think of Black women or Black children. They don't really think of us. Damn straight. That is absolutely the issue. And again, it's one of the reasons we actually started having a conversation on this channel about what serious Black male politics can look like. Because at the end of the day, the proxy for the Black vote has become Black women. And the reason for that is because for the last number of decades, most particularly since the 70s, with the increase in the incarceration rate of Black men, and of course the stripping of voting powers with those incarceration rates, even when they get out, Black women have been viewed as the target group to talk about voting. But really, what we sidestep in order to do that is how disenfranchised Black voters, Black male voters, are due to incarceration, and what that does to the political power they may have, at least enough to be heard in terms of their interests and their concerns. And this is what I think his name was Willie is somewhat gesturing to, right? That at the end of the day, they're not listening to Black men. And so Black men have tried everything from being disconnected and despondent to voting conservative, voting against their what seemingly immediate political interests, but doing whatever it can to try different options, because continuing to pour votes down the same pipeline just doesn't seem to work. And if nobody's going to pay attention to you when you do or when you don't, you might as well start some trouble. But the real focus here in this article is all about Bass, and most particularly, it's all about either dismissing Black men's concerns or framing them as sexist. Now, she does some lip service through these interviews to pointing to their problems. But let's see for the rest of the article if she actually delves into what Willie said and talks at length about the policies, especially over the decades, that didn't include Black males at all. Does she go in depth into that? Does she examine that? Or does she accept it as a critical argument that may have affected every black male she's talked to or thought about in relation to this subject? Or does she just give Willie the one line? Well, let's take a look. Willie ran through a list of government assistance programs from tax credits to food benefits for infants, arguing that they primarily benefit women. Meanwhile, single black men are disproportionately homeless and politicians don't care. This is why he speculated that black men vote differently than black women. But that's okay, he spat, shaking his head in resigned anger. On Sunday, the Bass campaign didn't respond to a request for comment about the new poll. See, she went right back to the poll. Right? Now, I'll credit her with at least acknowledging Willie's comment. But as a journalist, did she go into any more depth about what was going on, about whether or not Willie may have had a point, about whether or not nationally black men are feeling Willie on a level that most people drastically underestimate? Is that happening here? How seriously are many people, be it the Democrat Party or black women as a group, taking what Willie is talking about? Because I can tell you in the circles I run in, that shit is on fire. She treated it like just an offhand quote to not be taken seriously. I would argue it is the crux of the issue for many black men. And in a particular way, voting right, voting left, not voting, voting green, in many ways, all of those choices for some black men, many black men, I would argue, are all shaped by the same core issue, right? So she continues. Statistically, the trend line on black men, while a bit embarrassing, isn't a serious problem for her in the primary. Black voters only make up a mere 13% of the electorate in LA, and heading into the official close of voting on Tuesday, Bass is leading Caruso in the polls overall 38 to 32%, signaling that there will be a November runoff. In many ways, though, there's a race that's bigger than just LA. How Angelenos vote for mayor is sure to have national implications on issues ranging from criminal justice reform and policing to housing and homelessness. How we vote also will provide a window into how some of the larger problems with the Democratic Party are likely to shake out in the coming years. In 2020, black voters were the difference between a second term for Donald Trump and a first term for Joe Biden, the difference between a slim majority in Congress and Republicans running the show. As the midterms approach, given the partisan brinkmanship, right, and collapse of so many Democratic priorities in Congress, including the police reform effort that Bass helped lead, there are fresh fears that black voters won't return in similar numbers this year or in 2024. And you need to know those fears are legitimate when it comes to many black men. They're becoming increasingly disillusioned, right? Sacrifices in voting don't come with a reward. You know, it just is what it is. And life without voting for many looks the same as life by voting. So if you're going to motivate and inspire black men to participate, you need to give them a reason. You need to give them a reason. Let me see. All right. Got 422. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Don't forget to support the channel if you want to hear more of these types of subjects brought up. Indeed, a recent Gallup poll found that Biden's approval rating among black adults was 67%, down 20 points from the beginning of his presidency. Younger voters and Latinos aren't really feeling the current administration either, setting off even more panic among Democrats. Then again, it's just a poll. Exit polling from the 2020 election indicated more black men defected to Trump. It turned out to be more hype than reality, and the poll numbers ahead of the primary in the mayoral race could be as well. Right, and that basically meant that yes, an increasing number of people voted for Trump, a number of black men, but statistically, the overwhelming majority of black men still voted Democrat. Matter of fact, the interesting paradigm here is that black men vote Democrat more than any other demographic except for black women. But again, black men are the most disenfranchised voters in the country as far as the impact of incarceration on their voting capacity. So them voting second, you would think, would be honored, especially since they hold that particular albatross in a way that even black women don't. And it's poorly acknowledged, if anything. I mean, the funny part about it is, despite voting to the second highest level, which the only time you really hear black men is when they're being socially punished, especially by black women, for a percentage of them that don't vote left, don't vote Democrat. That's interesting. Why would you punish the second highest voting demographic for your party if they're actually still voting? But the small increase or the percentage increase in voters for Trump do signal something that needs to be addressed. And instead of addressing it head on, you further punish them, dismiss them, call them stupid. or just say they're misguided, or call them sexist. That's your response to this? Really? Well, I will say this. If it's going to continue to be a disingenuous response to black males' legitimate concerns, you will find an even greater withdrawal. And here's the thing: black men are withdrawing across the board in so many different areas, from voting to relationships to social involvement, hell, even to attending, Christmas parties at work, to the extent that those things still happen. We're finding that men are withdrawing, and black men in particular are finding their own ways of addressing situations. Now, here's the thing: I'm not necessarily supportive of every argument, everything that black males are doing. But my position is that black men deserve the goddamn right to do it. If you're not going to pay attention to them, if you're not going to listen to them, then hey, whatever they do to find a new option, I ain't mad at. Meaning, I support the gesture. I'm interested to see what it becomes in the next coming years. I want to see what black men decide to do, where they kind of gel, where they acclimate to, what they acclimate to. But I'm not mad at the attempt, because at the end of the day, doing the same thing we've always done has led to nothing. No genuine concern, not even within the Democratic Party or in the black community, about what black men's issues are. This is why when black men read the black male political agenda, much of the time the comments I get are mind blowing, because they themselves are mind blown, because they've never, and I'm talking about men in their 60s and 70s, they've never seen a list of policy suggestions that actually suit just them as a demographic. They've not seen it. So they're blown away by it, right? And of course, some of the women that I've had read through it, there have been a portion of them that have been supportive and others that were incensed. But one of the core reasons that some of them were incensed was because it didn't include them. It was actually, as the title suggests, a black male political agenda. And they found it threatening that there be one. But they don't find it threatening when the policies, like Willie points out, are overwhelmingly for women and girls. When the credit for voting in a Democratic candidate goes to black women and black men are ignored, even though, again, second highest voting group for the Democrats, even though they get little for it and they're the most disenfranchised, but nobody cares. The only time they care is when black men don't follow suit and do what they're supposed to do and follow the party line. That's when we need to be publicly spanked like children, which I argue this article contributes to. Let me see. Black women have long been thought of as the backbone of the Democratic Party. We are the influential, if relatively small, percentage of the population, especially in California, credited with delivering voters to deliver elections. Now, perhaps it's black men who are becoming the bellwether of the Democratic Party. Because if you can't convince a majority of liberal black men in an overwhelmingly blue city like LA to vote for the former head of the Congressional Black Caucus, what hope do Democrats have in red and purple states? That's the Ice Cube effect. Well, here's the thing. I think one of the main things she gets wrong is she's trying to identify what she calls the Ice Cube effect, right? And I actually, have developed a concept I've been talking about on my channel that I think is a better tool for assessing what black men are dealing with. And I call it the Black Masculinist turn. Now, she and I overlap in a certain area in terms of addressing Ice Cube, because I think one of the moments that was critical to this discussion is when Ice Cube had the argument or the discussion. He wasn't arguing, I don't think. They were more arguing with him, but with the Cocktails with Queens, most particularly Vivica Fox, right? And they chastised him for not having a section of his agenda for Black America dedicated to women. And he said, no, I have a section generated, and the whole thing is dedicated to the Black community, and women are a part of the community. But as a masculinist, let me say, a Black masculinist, he didn't have a portion dedicated to Black men either. I understood that when I read it. I understood it when I heard him talk about it. I didn't chastise him about it because I got what he was doing. He was trying to uplift the Black community as a whole. But here's the problem. If you're going to continue to chastise him for not leaving a section only for Black women, what that does to Black men is something that most people haven't contemplated. It forces Black men to grasp that the politics that we've kind of held on to since the 1970s of voting and supporting this idea of a Black community, a communal sensibility, is under threat by a feminist agenda, a feminist platform that seeks to separate out qualifying benefits just for Black women and girls. And if that's going to be the case, while the numbers tell us that on almost every significant metric, Black men and boys are doing worse, then at some point in time, a logical person is going to say, well, we're going to have to address that. And the extent to which that Black men get ire for bringing up that point only further drives them into the question as to why the fuck we've been ignoring black men and boys the entire time. Why? What's the reason for it? Black men haven't said too much about the emphasis in the last 40 to 50 years on black women and girls, from everything from politics to media. They've quietly asked, well, we do have political issues that require attention. Shut up, sit down, do what we say, and vote for who we tell you to vote for. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about the black masculinist turn. The moment with Ice Cube was a moment where many black men watching that realized that something in black America has irrevocably changed, and it does not benefit black men. It does not benefit black boys. And there are more and more of these kind of moments that are taking place. Hell, the election of Kamala Harris was one of those moments. So much emphasis put on her identity as a black woman and being put into position that in and of itself didn't upset black men. Black men weren't inherently opposed to a black woman taking high issue. It was the extent, or high office. It was the extent to which that took priority over issues that actually pertain to black men. Hell, even the black community for that matter, if you really demand to stay generic about the shit. But as black men are starting to ask why their concerns are not being addressed, why their concerns are routinely put at the back of the bus, as it were, these kind of elections start to bear more weight. So everything from, the election of Trump, Kamala Harris, and there are plenty of other black masculinist moments. Don't get it twisted. This has been going on for quite a while, but it's reaching a crescendo. It's reaching a high pitch. And this article is evidence that it's something that is being seen by others, but it's not being framed properly. She frames it as sexism, frames it as errant men who don't really understand their politics. They're just really confused. But ultimately, by the end of the article, she says it's going to be okay because Bass is still ahead. See, her concern is electing Bass. It's not about understanding black men or addressing the legitimate concerns they have. It's about getting another black woman into office. As we've seen this push taking place across the country, from lower level positions to higher level electoral spots, again, just like with Harris, the concern is electing black women, not understanding black men. And so black men are quietly taking a step back, more and more. And many of them don't often even understand the full details, but they understand enough. This shit ain't working for us, and nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear what black men have to say. So why play the game? Y'all remember that old movie, that came out in the 80s with Matthew Broderick, right? The only way to win is not to play the game. Now, whether you agree with that or disagree with that, this is what many black men are shifting to. And it's going to become more and more of a problem the more we ignore black men's concerns. And this is one of the things I'm most concerned about. What are the long-term benefits of ignoring black men? Shout out to Jay Scar, says one of the many reasons for black men's silence existed from our childbirth, as our moms were the direct architects of our shaming and pacification. Well, that is. And I talk about how the moms were socialized to operate mostly on the benefit, on behalf of black women and girls. I mean, on this kind of myopic, solipsistic view where nothing else exists but other black women and girls, even when they have sons. And it's an interesting dichotomy to see. I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen on LinkedIn started by black women only for other black women, not for the black community. And this brings my point earlier about black men who are still advocating for the black community, who could not tell you a policy idea that they have for benefiting black men as a separate group. They couldn't tell you one because they never thought about it before. But the more and more black women are unapologetic about thinking about themselves, black men are finding themselves backed into a corner of having to do so. David Price, appreciate that support. Back up. Appreciate Varn James. Thank you for that support as well. All right. About to be on Dr. Thunder's channel a little bit, so I'm going to kind of push through this. Dr. Thunder's in the chat. Shout out to you. But these are the issues on the table. And so what I'm arguing chiefly with in regard to this article is how much the black masculinist turn is a better tool for understanding what's going on with black men. Because it's not just about Ice Cube. It's not just about politically voting right when most people want you to vote left. This is too small scale. The black masculinist turn is when black men themselves are starting to understand through the demonstration of widespread actions on a macro level, not just individual actions, how much they are not a concern for anybody. And these kind of moments, even this article is a further one of those moments that highlights nobody gives a damn. She paid more lip service than most, but at the end of the day, her dismissals of legitimate black male concerns and not even addressing a professional or an authority on these issues. She went to Lamert Park and interviewed a few brothers. And the one brother who's selling DVDs out of his minivan that had something to say, she quoted him, give her credit for that. But short of that, she didn't investigate anything he said to any degree. She didn't even name the policies he suggested were tied to only benefiting black women. Didn't even name them. Didn't even give her readers an opportunity to find out if he was right and if he was on to something that more and more black men are feeling. And here's the thing, you don't have to be on YouTube. You don't have to be a part of the so-called manosphere to feel those things. Black men have been, see, the manosphere itself, and I would argue as is black male studies, these are symptoms of major changes going on in the environment. Black men are responding to their position in the environment and how they're being treated, not just individually, not just by the occasional cop, but how they're being treated institutionally, how they're being treated in terms of policy. And that only leaves them with a couple of options: abstain and check out altogether, let apathy rule the day, or lean in and vote in strange and unpredictable ways to shake the tree and get people's attention. Or, and this is the one I'm hoping for most, begin to develop a very clear and well articulated political platform that engages whomever is running. And of course, at some point, produce our own candidates, but rooted in a clear idea of what's needed, what black men are talking about. Now, I'm going to put the links as usual to everything I'm citing, every article I'm looking at or whatever. I'm going to put those links in the description box, and I will be putting in links to the Black Male Political Agenda. You can find that on the blog, newblackmasculinities.wordpress.com. That is the blog that I use. That's where if you click on the About button, you can find the formal definition of Black masculinism. But when you look through the Black Male Political Agenda, you'll see proposal ideas that come from the 25,000 plus members of the Onyx Report, over 95% black male, who are making suggestions about policies that are designed to suit their needs. And here's the thing, you're not going to go back and find a lot of black male political agendas. I have asked other scholars, I've asked historians, I've asked people who've been active in the community for decades. I even asked an octogenarian not long ago. She couldn't even remember that. I've never seen a black male political agenda because overwhelmingly black men have been concerned about the community as a whole, but that concern is starting to shift. And I'm not saying that they don't care about the community. Some don't. Some of us have checked out entirely. But there are others who do care about the community, who are still starting to focus more on black male needs because the community has begun to define itself, particularly in popular media, without black men. I mean, this article here, she's celebrating black women, and via Bass, and and again, the general sentiment is that black men are a minor annoyance that are irresponsibly voting against their interests. Really dramatically underestimate to what extent this goes, and that's going to be a problem. Now, in an article I wrote on that same blog that I mentioned a moment ago, this is an article that I called "Why Black Generation X Men Are Fatherless." Right. Well, let me give you the exact title because I do think this is a good read for black men in particular. Why was Black Generation X fatherless? An article I think is important. I put in a quote that I thought was necessary that I pulled from the Breaking Brown show, right? And this was a conversation between Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore, right? And she says, what happens if we don't get better? What happens if people just keep making these erroneous assessments and agreeing with erroneous data and saying this is okay? What happens? And Antonio Moore answers, let me be honest. I think eventually black men are going to realize it and turn on everybody. Because what the system is built on is black men not knowing that they live in a different life than everybody, including black women. They're living a life where they're unemployed but expected to buy dates. They're supposed to protect and provide like a man, but they're put in jail at rates we've never seen before. He says, I was talking to an attorney. They said that black men should get together and claim refugee status with another country just to make a political point that nobody cares. And then he provides a chart on the incarceration rates. And he says, well, you know what? Hold on. I'll show it to you. Right? So that's the chart. Many of you have seen it over the years, right? The source is the Bureau of Justice Statistics, right? 2010. But this is Antonio Moore's work here, right? So you can see black men and then young black men incarcerated at unprecedented degree, right? He says this chart came as a result of me realizing nobody had framed this thing according to gender, which makes no sense. Nobody, not even the Department of Justice, because once you frame it against gender, then black men realize that this is some horrible shit, and they might just like raise up on everybody. And when I say raise up, I'm not talking about literally rioting in the street, even though I would argue that's more than warranted. I'm talking about like becoming real despondent, becoming like really like, I'm not fucking with nothing, no marriage, no nothing. I'm out. Don't nobody care. Ain't nobody trading nothing with me. Out. That quote is incredibly poignant and important, right? Because that's where many black men are finding themselves at. And when the best they can get are articles by black women who are low-key slapping them in the face rather than honestly listening to what black men have to say, all she's doing is fueling the fire. That's all it's really coming down to. It's another slick dismissal of black men's concerns. And I think it's going to generate some bad blood. But truth be told, the ball's already rolling down that hill. And unless there's a genuine, widespread demonstration of concern for black men beyond using our deaths to advance your political organization, your so-called grassroots organization, or even advance your political aspirations, black men are more and more saying, and I mean this with sincerity, fuck you. Y'all have a good one. See you soon.